Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2026 US Senate map and talking about essentially what is the best the Democrats can do. What is their best case scenario for the 2026 Senate elections? Now I just did a video on the House yesterday going over pretty much the same topic, same idea. So make sure after this video is done to go check that one out as well if that's something that you're interested in watching. So just give you an idea where this video is coming from, right now President Trump is currently polling near the lowest that his administration has been for his second term thus far at negative 11.4 points. While at the same time, the Democrats are currently polling near their highest they've been for the generic congressional ballot polling average for 2026, suggesting it's going to be a very good night for the Democrats, sort of in lieu with what we saw in the 2025 elections, where New Jersey, the Democrat won the governor's race by a way larger margin than was expected, in Virginia as well, where not only did the governor's race go by over 15 points for the Democrat, but the down ballot attorney general's race, which was supposed to be the very close one where the Republican could win, ultimately ended up being a likely Democratic win margin as well. So for today's video, we're going through the Senate map and looking at what the Democrats' best case scenario is. So first things first, we're going to start with the states that I imagine in this scenario to be safe for the Democrats. These are all going to be 15 points or more in the margin of victory, starting with the state of Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, which could be under 15 points, but I think in their best case scenario, we could see the Democrats certainly exceed on that margin. Illinois will be safe. Minnesota could potentially be safe. It depends. We did just see Amy Klobuchar win her Senate election in 2024 by 15.7%. So it certainly is possible, but without Klobuchar running, I think it'll be a little bit under 15 points. But Virginia could be safe. Delaware could be safe. New Jersey with Cory Booker certainly could be. Rhode Island and Massachusetts, all of which are going to be safe Democratic states, I think pretty much for sure. And this puts the Democrats up at 43, Republicans are at 31. Now, there are a good number of states that I do expect will be Republican safe states, pretty much no matter what as well. These are going to be states like Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So that puts Republicans also right around 43 states. Now, there are a handful of other states that I think are going to go for the Republicans and Democrats, but are going to be in the likely category of just a bit under 15 points, anywhere from 5 to 15 points. And this is the problem the Democrats have for the Senate in 2026, is when you look at the states that are up, a lot of these states do favor the Republicans. States like Montana, Nebraska, Texas, South Carolina, Florida. These are states that voted pretty sizably for Donald Trump in 2024, and I believe all of them voted for Trump in 2020 as well, and that's not even talking about the toss-up seats. So this map is very Republican friendly. So a best case scenario for the Democrats for 2026 probably won't be as good as other Senate election years every 2 years, but still there is in this map some real opportunities for the Democrats to pick up some ground here. First things first, Minnesota would go in the likely Democratic category of that 5 to 15 point margin. That certainly is one to watch for. The other one that I feel confidently could go in the likely Democratic category is the state of New Hampshire, where Chris Pappas will be facing off against most likely John Sununu. Sununu, having the Sununu name, is going to make this race a lot closer, but still, I think a more than 5-point victory for the Democrat is certainly possible in the Democrats' best case scenario. This puts the Democrats at 45, Republicans at 43. Now, some other likely states for the GOP as well. I think the state of Montana starts out as likely for the Republicans, as well as Lindsey Graham's seat in South Carolina is likely, and Florida, Ashley Moody as likely as well. This puts the Republicans up at 46. So I think the map really starts here at 46 to 45, with a handful of seats that are going to range between being lean to likely seats, sort of right around that 5-point margin, that if things got really, really close and there was a massive blue wave, I think we can kind of see how everything ultimately falls a little bit under 5 points. Just to give you a basis of this, the main map that I was considering was the 2014 map, where the Republicans had an absolutely landslide of an election night, where pretty much everything went their way, where you saw states like Colorado voting for the Republican by 1.9 points, the Republican nearly pulling off the upset in Virginia over the Democrat Mark Warner. That was a very close one as well. And again, this is 2014. This is pre-Donald Trump. This is pre the Rust Belt and everything that happened there. In Michigan was a 13-point win, but New Hampshire was a 3.2% win for Shaheen versus Scott Brown. This time around for 2026, I think we can see something going a little bit like this. For one thing, we can look at the state of Georgia with Jon Ossoff. Ossoff is running for re-election in a very close race. In my most recent election prediction, I had Ossoff favored to win that race by the lean Democratic column of around, I believe, 3 to 5 points or so in that range. I expect it to be very close. In the Democrats' best case scenario, if it goes to a runoff, it is possible Ossoff could win by more than 5 points, but I'm going to just put it for now, for caution reasons, in lean Democratic category, a little bit under 5 points when everything is said and done. Seeing as Georgia, unlike Virginia, is more of a toss-up state, there'll be more Republican floor there, but certainly Georgia looks like me more on the solid Democratic side than the Republican side in this best case scenario for the Democrats. The next state that I would say is most likely to go for the Democrats would then be probably the state of Michigan in this scenario, and lean Democrat as well. Now, Michigan is going to be interesting because the Republican primary is a lot more locked up than the Democratic one is, so that's still going to be very contentious and will have to sort itself out. But it should be worth noting, President Trump will not be at the top of the ticket in 2026, and Republicans have had a voter turnout issue problem when Trump is not on the top of the ticket, especially in a Rust Belt state like Michigan. So Michigan being a Democratic win of around 4 to 5 points in an off-year election certainly is very doable for the Democrats. Now, the next two that are going to be very important to watch for the Democrats are 2 seats currently held by the Republicans. Firstly, in North Carolina, where Roy Cooper, the Democratic former governor of North Carolina, is running against Michael Whatley, the former Republican RNC chair, to try and flip that Senate seat blue after Tom Tillis has represented it since that 2014 election where he won that race. North Carolina is going to be very interesting. It's a swing state at the presidential level. It does seem to trend a little bit more to the GOP than the Democrats, though, as Trump won it in 2024 and 2020 and 2016. The last time it went Democratic was 2008 for Barack Obama by under 1 point, but is always consistently close and consistently under 5 points. Now, Roy Cooper being the former governor, elected twice by a larger margin in his second term in 2020, shows at very least he is probably the most formidable Democratic candidate in the state of North Carolina, and against Michael Whatley in a very strong Democratic midterm wave year. In the Democrats' best case scenario, Cooper can certainly win this race by at least a 1 to 5 point margin. So that puts North Carolina blue. Now, the next state that is the Democrats' best pickup opportunity is the state of Maine. Maine is an interesting state because Susan Collins is running as the Republican incumbent in the only Senate seat held by a Republican that voted for Kamala Harris in 2024. Harris won the state by 7 points in 2024 over Donald Trump, and back in 2020 on the same election ballot as Trump, Susan Collins won her Senate race by 8.6%. Though it should be worth noting, Collins getting 50.98%, Democrat Sarah Gideon got 42.39%. Due to ranked choice voting in Maine, if you break 50% in the first ballot, then that's just how it is. But then if it's under 50%, then ranked choice voting takes effect. It would probably be a big bet that if ranked choice voting was needed, we would have saw a much closer election that Collins still obviously would have won, but it would have been a lot closer. Now for 2026, Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, is running in this race, as well as certainly scandal-plagued candidate Graham Plattner. We have to wait and see how that Democratic primary shakes out. I would personally bet on Janet Mills being the stronger candidate at the general election level, but Maine, without a doubt, is certainly within grasp for the Democrats of flipping in 2026, and if they do, it would get Democrats to 49 seats, Republicans at 46, which is already very significant, as the Democrats have held Georgia and Michigan, their most vulnerable Democratic senators that are up, and have now flipped their two most Republican vulnerable ones in North Carolina and Maine, getting the Democrats from 47 Senate seats already up to 49, which already would be a very big impact on trying to slow down President Trump's agenda. But it doesn't even stop there. In the Democrats' best case scenario, I think we could see a very realistic scenario where the state of Ohio, after being a predominantly red state for a pretty long time, finally flips back to the Democrats by a very narrow margin. And the number one reason being is that the Democrats have also landed an A-plus recruit in former U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown, who just lost in 2024 by 3.6% against Republican challenger Bernie Moreno. Now, this time around, you're going to see Brown facing off against Republican incumbent John Husted, who was appointed, the lieutenant governor, was appointed as senator to replace the term of J.D. Vance, as he's now the vice president of the United States. This is going to be a very competitive race regardless, and I do think it ultimately does lean for the Republicans. But Sherrod Brown, being a former U.S. senator, who back in 2018, the last time he ran in President Trump's midterm, he won by roughly 7 points. So given the advantage of a Republican incumbent, but still in a Democratic wave year, I think in the Democrats' best case scenario, Sherrod Brown could pull off the upset in this race and get the Democrats to that all-important number of 50 Senate seats. Now, at this point, the Democrats still don't have control of the U.S. Senate, as in a 50-50 Senate, the Republican Vice President, J.D. Vance, breaks the tie on all Senate votes. But based on how the Senate map is constructed, if the Democrats could get 50 Senate seats of 2026, that would be excellent for them, especially going into 2028. As that Senate map, there are a handful of pickup opportunities, including one in North Carolina and Wisconsin, that give the Democrats a very strong chance at flipping the Senate in 2026. Now, the question is going to be outright, can the Democrats ultimately win the Senate majority in 2026 by flipping one of the remainder Republican seats in Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, or Alaska? And right now, my gut instinct and recent polling analysis is that they probably can't, but because a lot of these states are a lot more red than some of these other states. But there is some interesting scenarios where it could potentially happen. I think the where it's least likely to happen now is the state of Iowa, with Republican Ashley Hinton running to replace Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst was very unpopular, but now that she's not running, I think the Republicans do better in Iowa, so much so they would win it by at least 1 to 5 points. I think that one's essentially kind of out of the running. Now, Nebraska is going to be interesting as Dan Osborne, the independent, is running again, this time against Republican Pete Ricketts, and some internal polls from Osborne have shown it to be a close race, especially if there's a big appetite for change. Now, that being said, Nebraska is also a very red state as well. At the presidential level, it just voted for Donald Trump by 20.5%. And though the Senate level, it did vote for Deb Fischer by 6.7%. Deb Fischer, in my opinion, is also a weaker Republican candidate than is Pete Ricketts. So ultimately, I think the Republicans would still win Nebraska. It could fall under 5 points and get very competitive, but I think it's a tall task for the Democrats to try and win that seat. So for me, in my current map and current rankings right now, for the Democrats of having any hope at breaking 50 Senate seats and getting to 51, I think it relies on either Alaska or Texas. Now, it's crazy to say this because Texas obviously is thought of as a long stalwart of the Republicans, but it almost recently, in 2018, had a very close Senate election where Ted Cruz only came within 2.6% of losing to Beto O'Rourke. So even though it's going to be, obviously, Texas has gotten, I would argue, more red from 2018 to 2024. Don't forget, in 2020, it voted for Donald Trump by only 5.6%, but in 2024, it voted for Trump by 13.7%. So Texas has gotten a lot more red, but in the Senate race, there is the potential it could be close. Cruz just won this time by 8.5%. There is the potential if Ken Paxton becomes a Republican candidate for Senate. He's deeply unpopular in a lot of opinion polling, especially among independents, and a definitely very large margin of Democrats. But if there's enough Republicans that don't like him, that could make the race very close as well. Still, given the overall partisan lean of the state of Texas, though, I do think Ken Paxton and the Republicans would still be favored to win this race in the lean Republican category in the Democrats' best case. So that is certainly something to keep an eye out for in that one. The true wild card on the 2026 Senate map, I think if the Democrats get to 51, where they could do it, maybe the state of Alaska, where there's been rumors that former Democrat Congresswoman Mary Peltola would consider a run for U.S. Senate against the Republican incumbent Dan Sullivan. Now, Peltola is a really interesting prospect for the Democrats because Dan Sullivan won in 2020 by 12.7% against the Democratic candidate. 2 years later, Peltola runs for House, and she wins against Sarah Palin in ranked choice voting I don't know if ranked choice voting was required, but I believe it was, by roughly 9.9%. So she went to likely Democratic margin in 2022, which was supposed to be a Republican midterm year, but with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it ended up being a lot more of a Republicans picked up a few seats, but Democrats did much better than expectations. Now in 2024, ranked choice voting, I do believe was ultimately needed, but Republican Nick Begich did defeat Mary Peltola by 2 points, 48.4 to 46.37. So very close defeat for Peltola in 2024. Now for 2026, she would have the advantage of running in a Democratic midterm election environment year, where if you're seeing enough down ballot effects where Ohio's going red, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, and Maine are all going blue, and Iowa, Nebraska, Texas fall under 5 points, is there a potential that a generic Democrat versus Dan Sullivan could win this race in Alaska? I would still say probably not. Alaska's still pretty red. I don't think it would ultimately go blue. But Mary Peltola, who seems to be more of a, I would say, more on the moderate side of the Democrats and someone who really appeals to the local issues of a lot of Alaskan voters, I think that does give her a very legitimate chance at winning the Senate race. Now, overall, gut instinct and polling analysis would suggest I still think Dan Sullivan holds on and wins this race. But if everything broke for the Democrats in like a absolutely blue tidal wave tsunami type election environment, Seeing Alaska ultimately barely flip blue for Mary Peltola would certainly be a shock, but one that could happen. So if the Democrats are winning the Senate in 2026, I think we see it like this. They win in Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Maine, and then they flip one of the Republican likely states in Alaska. That's the way the Democrats, I think, could do it. Ultimately, I do think Dan Sullivan would still hold on, though, even in a very close race, and it would be a 50-50 Senate in the Democrats' best case scenario. But the prospect of Mary Peltola doing so is certainly at very least on the cards if the election environment becomes a big enough wave for the Democrats. And then, like I said, about the Senate map heading into 2028, you're going to have some very close Senate elections up in Wisconsin and North Carolina, both under 5 points in 2022, held by Republican incumbents that Democrats could be looking to flip, while at the same time defending close Senate seats in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. So 2028 could be very interesting as well, but depending on how 2026 goes, if the Democrats can get up to 49, 50, 51 seats, then they give them a much stronger chance at winning the Senate and keeping it in 2028. I hope you found this video interesting. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Don't worry if you're a Republican. I do plan on doing a future video on the Republicans' best case scenario as well, sort of obviously to level things off, but I do plan on doing that as well. Again, make sure to check out the video I did just yesterday on the House map going over a similar scenario. I think you'll find it very interesting if you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.